One of the more interesting and formative experiences that I was privileged enough to have as a younger guy, not long after graduating from college and um, having come through some rather complicated personal stuff, I got involved into backpacking, trekking, that kind of thing, kind of a big way. In spite of the fact that I grew up in a relatively rural environment, I didn't have really a very meaningful connection at that point to the natural world. Certainly, while we were people who spent some time in the woods, largely speaking, the natural world was a place to shoot things and dump trash. Really. And while it was something that we were not unfamiliar with, it was not something that we very typically had a great deal of communion with. But to not draw out the story too long, one of these particular backpacking expeditions went from the Continental Divide through the U.S. Canadian, basically border territories, towards the Washington coast through the backcountry at about 1,100 miles. It took me about 100 days to walk it off. So I had a chance there to spend a significant amount of time in the natural world without much other influence. And I remember very much this funny experience of starting the hike, and as one is prone to do, especially as a kind of a new hiker, one has a tendency to gravitate towards setting up camp near streams or running water or something. It's just innate in human beings to want to do that. And you would. And very often, in the middle of the night, the sound of the running water and the movement of the rocks in the stream bed and all the rest, noises that during the day are somewhat occluded by the interaction of your other senses, those noises become quite pronounced, and your brain finds ways of playing tricks on you with them, and it invents things, acoustic inkblot tests for your own state of mind, inventing out of those noises meaningful things. And of course, as one might actually naturally suspect, the kinds of things that my mind would tend to invent for me early in the trip were things that were common to my experience. Sounds like babies crying, or annoying sounds of engines running, or garbled messages of perhaps news on car radios in the distance, or couples disagreeing with each other, or just kind of random noise, always tinted with a certain amount of anger and frustration, really ubiquitous in the sounds of those rivers. 100 days later, that had completely transformed. It had my mind had gone from hearing those things as part of my zeitgeist to almost exclusively music, and in particular music that very much resembled that of Bach, with strong geometric and mathematical artistry. I mean, really very, very declarative music. But much the music of Bach was what was heard in the voices of the rivers. And interestingly enough, while many years have passed since that experience, having experienced that change in mindset so profoundly, well, it's never gone away. I have noticed at various times in my life, depending on the environment, that my inclination to hear less attractive things in the voices of the water will reemerge, and certainly when my headspace is healthier, more interesting and creative expressions have a tendency to be dominant. As a musician myself, I find that my own state of mental health and its ability to be creative really, really can be quite accentuated at some times and very nearly absent at other times, depending on how my relating in the general world is going. It isn't that I lose the ability to play the instrument in a state that, say, is less than elegant, but I certainly lose the ability to play the instrument meaningfully, creatively. Meaning that my musicality has a tendency to resemble more typing than playing an instrument. I can go through the motions, but again, there's very little spontaneous creativity in it unless I'm in an environment which allows that to naturally emerge. And it's worth contemplating a little bit what might really be meant by the slippery term, the creative element. Certainly in esoteric tradition, reference to a innate creative characteristic in human beings is a big, big deal. Maybe the biggest of deals. There is something inherently magical, and I use that term precisely, in fact, in the ability of some human beings, and I will say some human beings, and unique among any living beings that we are as of yet aware of. Some human beings have the capacity to reach somehow into the conceptual abstract and out of literally nothing but a vision create real, tangible, material things in the physical world. And honestly, if you spend the time and you reflect on it, if you reflect on the matter with the seriousness that the concern really warrants, maybe read a little Buckminster Fuller while you do it. That's astonishing, really, that some human beings have the ability to create things out of nothing but some kind of crazy metaphysical ether. And that there is a process, this ephemeral process, as Fuller describes it, of this forward-reaching teleology, really, in the creative process that is always lifting life towards richer, broader, deeper, greater expressions of itself. Like, that's a very astonishing thing, and a tremendous thing if one becomes conscious, if at times in their life they are in possession of the ability to act in that manner. And again, to harp on my maxim that I use around here so much, the purpose of life is to live a life of purpose. Purpose is found in connection with other. Connection with other is intrinsic to the creative process. The fact is that in relation, the most fertile opportunities for the creative process are engendered, really. In fact, in a lot of ways, the whole point of relating to other, objectively even, is to create an environment in which the creative process can naturally unfold of its own accord. Again, that can be taken in a very material sense or a very metaphysical sense, and there's endless literature written about how that can happen at either end of that spectrum. Now, of course, we have a problem. We live within the final stages of a global capitalist industrial control state, one that only understands relating to other as a means of extraction or extortion or exploitation. It's the only way it knows how to interact with other. Creativity is something that some individuals may find themselves here or there employed in within that system. A very, very few of us might. But the system itself is wholly destructive, wholly objectively destructive. There is no element to it objectively that has a restorative or constructive element, let alone creative element embodied in it. And in fact, the situation for the masses of less than creative individuals within it, while there is still some place out there to extort and to export your misery to, while it holds together, the capitalist enterprise might feel good for you, especially as the average individual does not have the capacity to relate to other, but only responds to stimulus, something very different. It's probably the case that for the average individual, while the gasoline is still at the pump and while the food is still in the grocery store, they probably think civilization is just grand. But for individuals that are more intuitive and sensitive and have the capacity for real creative potential, perhaps as a more dominant characteristic, industrial civilization is nothing short of a hellscape that competes fundamentally with one's own reason for being, and it becomes extremely necessary somewhere to form personal strategies by which one is able to survive and to keep those attributes alive within them, at least to the level that allows them to find some outlet for expression. And that is not easy to do. So in the next dialogue that I hope to put together, I would like to discuss those strategies by which to keep that creative spark, that spark that's essential to one's own human nature, alive. Strategies for doing that in some detail are worth our time to reflect on. But first and foremost, somewhere along the line, there has to be some event wherein that creative spark that perhaps lies latent thus far, as it did for me as a young man. It took 100 days in the woods for that spark to be fanned into flame. It will take something of that kind of magnitude likely for you too, if it hasn't yet already occurred. Once lit, it's not something that dies of its own accord, but it is certainly something that can get smothered. Once you become aware of an innate drive to exercise that creative aspect of being, it forces one to adopt a posture towards certain things that you may encounter in life, like the way we go about civilization, that you find ultimately in opposition to those ends, that they make those sorts of things difficult. And certainly, once that becomes a value for you, it's also a value that you see when expressed in other people to be something of tremendous precious value, something that you would hope to, as a co-participant in life, help them support just as much as you would wish it to be supported in your own life. It's a very big thing, and let's do a little reflecting and talk about it further, okay?